we're continuing to talk about the reliability of the New Testament. So what I want to do right now is look at two books, Luke, the Gospel of Luke, and the book of Acts. And I think that there's some strong evidence, and there are other scholars who agree with me. There's a big debate about it. But I think there's strong evidence that both of these books had to be written 61 AD or earlier. And let's take a look at some of the evidence. First, they were both addressed to Theophilus. And Luke starts out the first 3 or 4 verses that the author is writing to Theophilus, calls him most excellent Theophilus, as if he's some kind of government official, and but tells him he wants to tell him about Jesus of Nazareth and tell him about his background and his life and his ministry. And then you have the Gospel of Luke. Well, the book of Acts is the sequel to it. Oh, most excellent Theophilus, I told you about the life of Jesus and his ministry until he ascended to heaven. Now I want to tell you what happened to his followers after that point. And so they're both written to Theophilus. The grammar, the vocabulary is very similar. So most scholars agree. Whoever wrote Luke also wrote Acts. Well, as we look closely at Acts, Acts is the sequel to Luke, so Luke was written before Acts. When we take a close look at Acts, we notice that it talks a lot about Peter. It talks a lot about Paul. Probably the next most important character in the book of Acts is James, the half-brother of Jesus. Okay? The temple is very important, plays a prominent role in the book of Acts, as does the city of Jerusalem. Okay? Now, just from knowing that, we get some clues that this book, the book of Acts, was written about 61 AD. And that's because they're recording important things. He's telling Theophilus, he's filling him in about the early history of the church, yet he doesn't tell him about Peter and Paul's deaths, which occurred somewhere between 64 and 67 AD. In fact, James's death is not included, and that occurred in 62 AD. The temple is very important in the book of Acts, yet it was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, and the Romans invaded Jerusalem. The Jewish war with the Romans, actually the war began, they invaded a little later, but it began in 66 AD. And all of this is left out. This would be important stuff. I mean, there are deaths recorded in the book of Acts. Ananias and Sapphira. You have those two people for lying to the Holy Spirit. They're struck dead. You have Stephen, who's only mentioned in a couple chapters, yet they record his death where he gets stoned to death. You have James, the brother of John, is beheaded. You have even one of the Herods. God strikes him dead, and that's recorded. But why not the big 3 characters? Their deaths are not recorded. It makes no sense. And then you have all these exciting things going on in the book of Acts. And nowhere in the book of Acts, we have all this exciting stuff going on, yet the book of Acts closes in an anticlimactic way with Paul in Rome, in chains, under house arrest, and it leaves you hanging right at about 61 or 62 AD. Okay? That makes no sense unless Luke wrote right up to the present day and then rolled up the scroll and sealed it and had it delivered to Theophilus. So the reason why James's death is not recorded is because James died after this book was written and sealed and mailed. Okay? And so if Acts was written in 61 AD, since it's the sequel to Luke, more than likely Luke was written sometime in the 50s AD, maybe even earlier. But whatever the case, what we've shown is this is pre-70 AD stuff. Well, there was once a liberal New Testament scholar who eventually reached the point where he realized that he actually argued all the New Testament books had to be written before 70 AD because they never talk about the destruction of the temple, which occurred in 70 AD. Now, I don't know if I would date all the New Testament books before 70 AD, but it does beg the question as to why they would leave out the destruction of the temple when the temple plays such an important role in the New Testament. I think we have important documents here in the New Testament that were either written by eyewitnesses who knew Jesus or people who knew the eyewitnesses' colleagues.